The past few years have shown me something. Live service games, or games as a service as they used to be called, are here to stay. The recent announcement and backlash against Rocksteady and Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League has brought the genre back into the spotlight. A genre that brings almost universal disdain from the larger gaming community, despite birthing games with very dedicated and large fan bases. Destiny, Warframe, Fortnite, and many others dominate the genre. Of course, there have also been many more flops. Anthem, Battleborn, Marvel's Avengers, Babylon's Fall, the list goes on. Despite the risk associated with the genre, game developers are captivated with the potential profits and unique ways of delivering content tailor-made for their own fanbase. This has intrigued me. As a hardcore Destiny fan, and unfortunately a prior Anthem hopeful, I want to see what makes certain games of this type succeed where others fail. To accomplish this, I will look at two games: the biggest success, Destiny, and the biggest failure, Anthem. I will look at three factors that I think will make the differences between these two games clear. 1. Profits. 2. Story and how it is delivered. 3. Dev-player interaction. Through my own experience with live service games, I have come to understand the importance of the aforementioned aspects. Before we get started, there are a few details that need to be ironed out. While Anthem servers are still online, certainly a shock to many of you, the game has not been updated in quite a long time, and its servers are in a constant state of being threatened as to whether or not they're going to be online. Secondly, comparing these two games as they are today is entirely unfair. Destiny has had almost 10 years of updates and refinement, while Anthem died before its second major content update. In order to make this more fair, I will only take Destiny's first year into consideration in this video. Now that that's settled, let's get started. At the end of the day, games are a product. The only thing that matters in the end to a lot of people is the money it brings in. The shift from a game as a product game to a game as a service, they have to consistently bring in money and keep players playing to be considered viable. While it should go without saying that Destiny has had a much more consistent player count than Anthem had, the money tells a more nuanced story. The original release of Destiny made $547.5 million in pre-orders and sales within the first month. With a budget of $140 million, that's a solid profit of $407.5 million within the first month. Taking into account the 4 years of inflation between the games, that amounts to roughly $432.3 million. Now, we move on to Anthem. Sales and budget for the game were much harder to come by. All I could find was an estimate of about 5 million units sold, equaling about $300 million in sales, assuming every copy was a standard edition of the game. The budget was even less helpful. All I could find was a general estimate, $100 million to $200 million. For the sake of this, I will put it in the middle at roughly $150 million, leaving $150 million in sales over the whole lifetime of the game. Now let's put those numbers into perspective. Bungie and Activision had a 10-year deal and plan for Destiny at launch, with a $500 million budget for the entire franchise at the offset. The game making almost the entire franchise's budget within the first month gave them much hope for the future of the franchise. Anthem's devs also had similar expectations, hoping and failing to hit 6 million units sold by March 2019. EA and BioWare also had a 10-year plan for the game with some notable changes. Destiny's plan accounted for profits from DLCs and sequels, while Anthem was intended to be a one-spot game with free updates and microtransactions. Unfortunately for them, they underestimated the profits they would make from the base game and grossly underestimated the profits from microtransactions, leaving BioWare to scrap their planned free updates to try to do damage control in the game, which was also scrapped. To summarize, EA and BioWare had unreasonable expectations for the game's sales and had to keep switching strategies because of that. When creating a game intended to last for years, it is important to give players an acceptable story to keep them intrigued and eagerly awaiting for the next piece. This is something that Warframe and current Destiny developers understand. The initial story for live service games has tended to be hit or miss, with most falling towards the miss end of the spectrum. The same is true for the year one story of Destiny, as well as Anthem, however in a much more egregious way. Let's get into it. Destiny takes place after a long period of disaster and turmoil, referred to as the Collapse. Humanity entered a golden age after the discovery of an ancient object on Mars led to immense scientific discovery and expansion throughout the solar system. Eventually, the object, known as the Traveler, became silent. Simultaneously, the forces of alien species arrived in the solar system. As its final act, the Traveler released small, intelligent robots called ghosts. They have the power to resurrect dead beings and act as a vessel to connect them to the Traveler's light, granting them superpowers. They are called Guardians. In the game, it starts with the player-created character being resurrected by your ghosts. During the game's main campaign, you travel to a few planets within our solar system. On each, the player completes a few missions that are loosely connected to each other and the larger narrative. It ends with the player breaking into a place known as the Black Garden and destroying its heart. This is a very short summary for the purposes of this video. For a more complete summary, I recommend you check out My Name is Bife's videos on the game, as they are detailed and excellent. The main issues with Destiny's initial campaign was the disconnected nature of it and the anticlimactic ending. The individual missions or planet storylines might have been interesting, but their connections to each other were almost non-existent. The final fight in the Black Garden was cool, but seemed to come out of nowhere and had no real effect on the future of the story, which is a common critique of Destiny's story. My summary for Anthem will be much shorter. Before I decided to make this video, it had been years since I played the Anthem campaign. Only recently did I just complete it again, and honestly, it is a boring experience. The game takes place on an alien planet with plenty of monstrous enemies and dynamic weather. To combat this, the player, called a freelancer, flies in one of a handful of flight suits. Before the humans arrived, the gods of the planet left powerful relics hidden throughout the planet. A bad guy gets a hold of one called the Anthem of Creation, and then you defeat him. A lot of Anthem's story problems were shared between it and Destiny. An anticlimactic ending, somewhat disjointed storylines. However, a piece that Destiny didn't really have were filler missions. Missions that were added to pad out the game time and didn't progress the story in any meaningful way. It feels like the majority of the missions in Anthem are filler missions. None of them are particularly interesting, and they're just there to keep you playing. Due to devs needing to keep players for longer times to keep a game afloat, an important facet of live service games is the dev-player interaction. What I mean by that is how the devs communicate their plans to players and how the players' feedback is collected and interpreted by the devs. With Destiny, the developer Bungie started a weekly blog post that discusses upcoming content, giving dev insight and acting as a weekly check for the game. Bungie also currently has 3 community managers who all work on collecting feedback from players and acting as the middleman to the dev team. This is a great system allows players to be assured their feedback is heard and learn of large-scale changes before they're implemented, as well as gives players a look into how the game is developed. For Anthem, they had much less passive effective communication. From what I can tell, they really only had one community manager who would tweet info, as well as being active with games journalists. They did put out a roadmap at one point, but it ultimately got scrapped due to the game underperforming, throwing away what little goodwill they had with their community. Out of these three traits that we have looked at, it becomes clear that the main difference between Anthem and Destiny was the lack of communication and follow through from BioWare on the game. The original release of Destiny was widely considered a flop. It had underperformed in all aspects aside from sales and had left players wanting more. But over time, with solid communication, the devs built up a fan base that is dedicated while also continuously seeking to improve the game. If Anthem had done that, BioWare and EA had stuck to their plans, maybe we'd be living in a world where the Destiny killer had actually killed Destiny. Who knows?